Close the USAID. These are wealthy countries, and it's sort of funny when people picket in front of Columbia, in front of Harvard, and they have masks on, more than masks. I mean, you can't see anything.
And what do you think the penalty should be for these people who are, if they are found guilty?
This is pretty significant. The president announced some changes to the USAID group.
Okay, what did he say exactly?
He said, and I'm quoting loosely here, "We have closed the USAID group to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse."
Close the USAID group to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse, which was tremendous waste, fraud, and abuse.
He was very clear on that point.
Waste, fraud, and abuse. Strong words. So what's the new direction then, especially with Africa?
Well, he followed up saying, "And we're working tirelessly to forge new economic opportunities involving both the United States and many African nations."
Economic opportunities. So less traditional aid, more partnership.
Precisely. He finished by saying, "This will be far more effective and sustainable." The idea is moving away from just giving aid, which some argue hasn't always worked or has led to dependency.
Towards building actual economic ties, trade, investment, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Things like the Prosper Africa Initiative, using the Development Finance Corporation, the DFC, to encourage private American investment. It's about mutual benefit, self-sustaining growth, not just handouts.
Makes sense. A fundamental shift, really. Okay, let's pivot to diplomacy. There was something quite striking involving the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Oh, absolutely. This was quite a moment. You had Senegal's president, Bassirou Diomaye Faye, publicly commending President Trump.
Commending him for what specific?
For peace efforts.
I also wanted to commend you for your commitment to peace.
President Faye said, "I also wanted to commend you for your commitment to peace throughout the world and the incredible diplomatic success that you had with the DRC."
Incredible diplomatic success relating to the conflict there.
Yes. And then he added, "True. Thankfully, you were here to put an end to this 30-year war."
Wow. Putting an end to a 30-year war. That's a massive claim.
It is. And for another head state to say it so publicly, it speaks volumes.
So what does this tell us about how President Trump's diplomatic style, often very direct, is viewed internationally, at least by some leaders?
Well, it suggests that this approach, the direct negotiation, sometimes challenging the old ways, is seen by some as getting results, tangible results, even in conflicts that seem, frankly, stuck for decades.
Like the DRC situation.
Yeah, exactly. Now, resolving something like that is always complex, lots of factors involved, regional dynamics, internal politics.
Sure.
But this specific praise highlights a perception that the president's focus on, let's say, decisive action can actually break through logjams, an outcomes-focused approach.
Interesting. Okay, let's switch gears again. The economy, tariffs. This has been a signature policy, hasn't it?
Absolutely. A cornerstone of his economic strategy, and he spoke about it again recently.
What was the latest angle?
He talked about the revenue, saying we're taking in hundreds of billions of dollars, which is, a point he often makes.
Right, the direct income from the tariffs.
But then he added, but more important than that, we have a lot of people that would rather not pay that. So they're coming in and they're building plants.
These are wealthy countries, and they or their companies will come into our country and build, and that's what's actually happening.
So the incentive effect. Avoid the tariff by producing here in the U.S.
That's the argument.
Yeah.
And he linked it to government efficiency, saying we're getting them fast approvals.
Okay, so the tariffs push companies to relocate, and the administration helps by cutting red tape for approvals. Is that the idea?
That's the vision presented, yes. Fast approvals act as a direct incentive, make it easier, quicker, more appealing to set up shop on American soil.
It's a strategy aimed squarely at boosting domestic manufacturing and jobs, using tariffs like Section 232 on steel and aluminum as leverage.
Precisely. Make imports costly, encourage domestic production or relocation here. Of course, economists debate the side effects, potential costs for consumers, retaliation from other countries.
Right, there are always those trade-offs to consider. Okay, moving on. There was a comment about masks. This sounded a bit more culturally pointed.
Yes, it touched on perceived double standards. He drew a contrast.
What was the comparison?
He said something like, when they picket in front of Harvard wearing masks, nobody complains.
And it's sort of funny when people picket in front of Columbia, in front of Harvard, and they have masks on, more than masks. I mean, you can't see anything. Nobody complains about that. But when Patriot, who works for ICE or Border Patrol, puts a mask on so that they won't recognize him and his family, there's a problem with that.
But when a patriot who works for ICE wears a mask so they won't be targeted, they have a problem.
So protesters wearing masks versus an ICE officer wearing one for safety?
Exactly. And then he linked it directly, saying, this is the problem with the Democrats.
Yeah.
They have a lot of bad things going on in their heads.
Okay, so he's pointing out what he sees as hypocrisy, a double standard based on who is wearing the mask and why.
That's the core critique, that the reaction isn't consistent, that it depends on the politics or the perceived group identity of the person wearing the mask.
And he frames it as a specific political issue tied to Democrats, suggesting a bias against law enforcement or maybe certain kinds of patriotism.
That seems to be the implication, that there's a selective acceptance or condemnation based on underlying political viewpoints, a critique of a particular mindset as he sees it.
Right. Definitely touches on some cultural divides there. Okay, finally, a very serious topic. Violence against law enforcement, specifically ICE officers.
Yes, this came up in a direct question. Someone asked him, what do you think the penalty should be for these people who shoot at ICE officers?
In his response,
Very clear, very direct, he said.
And what do you think the penalty should be for these people who are, if they are found guilty, for people
Very
who
stiff.
shoot at ICE officers?
Very, very stiff.
Very, very stiff.
stiff penalties. Did he elaborate?
He did. He emphasized a long time in jail, a long time.
Okay, so no ambiguity there. A call for severe consequences, lengthy prison sentences.
Absolutely. It's a very strong stance on law and order.
What does that signal more broadly about the administration's priorities, that emphasis on very, very stiff penalties?
It clearly signals that protecting federal law enforcement agents is a top priority. It's about deterrence, sending a message that violence against officers, against ICE agents in this case, will absolutely not be tolerated and will be met with severe punishment.
A firm line on protecting those who enforce the law.
Unmistakably. It underscores that commitment to maintaining order and backing law enforcement personnel. The directness of it leaves no room for doubt about that focus.
So quite a range we've covered today, from rethinking foreign aid in Africa and that major diplomatic claim about the DRC.
To the economic strategy behind tariffs and faster approvals, the cultural commentary on masks.
And ending with that very strong stance on justice for attacks against IC officers.
Yeah, taken together, these statements really paint a picture, don't they? An administration actively pushing specific agendas across many different fronts.
Each addressing what they see as either a key problem to solve or an opportunity to seize, often with quite decisive, maybe sometimes unconventional methods.
Definitely characterized by that directness we talked about.
So as you listen to all this, think about how these pieces fit together. What's the bigger story the administration is telling? And maybe just as important, how does that story land with different people out there?
Good questions to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Because these aren't just isolated events. They connect.
Absolutely. Keep exploring these headlines. Keep thinking critically about their impact. We'll be back next time for another deep dive on hidden headlines.